Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Data Business Planning National Workshop. My name is Nilu Parvinashtani and I'll be helping with facilitating today's webinar. This webinar is sponsored by the Federal Highway Administration and is hosted by the National Operations Center of Excellence, also known as NOCO. As a quick reminder, at NOCO we offer resources for the transportation system management and operations community. So on your screen right now on the bottom right side you see a box called useful links. So you can browse through those links for TSMO resources and news. Also you can find there previous webinar recordings and case studies related to topic of today's webinar, data for operations, and also other topics around TSMO can be accessed from there. Now I'll cover quickly a few logistics for the webinar today. We are recording this webinar and that recording along with the presentation slides will be available through the on-demand learning section of NOCO website. All the attendee phones are on listen-only mode by default, but I would like you to stay engaged by using the question discussion pod that you see right now on your screens for any comments or questions. We have dedicated some time at the end for question and answer. So as questions come to your mind during each presentation, please just put them in that chat pod, and at the end our moderator will be reading out loud each of those questions, and the questions will be answered by the presenters. So that is all I had, and with that, I'll hand it over to our moderator, Anita Vandervalk, to start us off. Anita, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nilo. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our national workshop related to data business planning and governance. Over the past few years, Federal Highway has led the development of a data business plan guide and assisted several agencies in developing pilot data business plans to address stakeholders' mobility data challenges. This webinar will provide information about the guide and features presentations from Hillsborough MPO, Maryland State DOT, Mid-America Regional Council, the Atlanta Regional Commission, and Nevada DOT. Presenters will share best practices and lessons learned in mobility data business planning and governance. This will be the order of the speakers. As mentioned, we will do Q&A at the end, so go ahead and start typing in any questions that you may have. I wanted to start by talking about what a data business plan is. It is a tool basically to assess and improve data management and governance. Data business plan can be used to link business objectives, programs, and processes and products, and at the end of the day, helps an agency identify action items to help improve the data governance and management of mobility data, both internally and regionally. The benefits of data business planning are many, as you can see on this slide. It helps you and your local partners understand what's being collected in your region, who's responsible for what, how is that data being collected, especially in today's age of proliferating data sources. It's important to stay on top of that with your partners. It helps you to solidify relationships and exchange data with your partners, helps you potentially identify duplicative data collection efforts, and at the end of the day, allows for more rapid and targeted data acquisitions and reduced collection and management costs in the future. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague at Federal Highway, Walter During. First, I'll introduce Walter. Walter is a transportation specialist in the Office of Transportation Management at the Federal Highway Administration and joined the administration in 2009. He manages the evaluation of the ongoing $45 million Connected Vehicle Pilots Program. Walter led the development of a white paper entitled Needs and Gaps in the Operation and Coordination of U.S. DOT Data Capture and Management Programs. As a follow-up on this effort, he successfully implemented a charter among Federal Highway Mobility Data Program officers and chairs its ongoing implementation phase. This program also provides assistance to states and local governments in the development of their mobility business plans. Walter was the regional design engineer at VDOT and subsequently the traffic engineer for the Winchester area. Earlier, Mr. During worked for a local government and for consultancy services in the areas of traffic management and transportation planning. Walter, I am ready to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Anita, and good day to all of you. Within my allotted time, I will endeavor to provide you with an abridged version of the Data Business Plan story. I will identify the problem, the action taken by Federal Highway Administration to get a full understanding of the problem, the outcomes and recommendations, and then I will talk through the benefits of the solution and also talk about the next step, that is where we are today. In fiscal year 2010, Federal Highway Administration Office of Operation identified the need to investigate inconsistencies and duplications within USDOT data programs. This led to the development of a white paper entitled The Needs and Gaps in the Operations and Coordinations of USDOT Data Capture and Management Program. The outcome of this white paper was that 3 types of gaps were identified: data gaps, coordination gaps, and gaps in standard and governance. Data gaps resulted from inconsistencies in the definition of performance measures, for example, travel time reliability, the use of default values for data elements, and in some cases the data is not independently validated, redundancies in the collection effort, inconsistencies in location referencing of data, and varying standards. Data gaps were due to coordination gaps were due to the fact that staff was unaware of projects that others at USDOT were working on. This resulted in duplicative efforts as we were duplicating studies. Data standards and governance to facilitate integration was the other. Here, there is a need for minimum data quality standards for data collection and processing. The recommendation from this white paper was that USDOT should implement or develop and implement a data business plan to mitigate these identified gaps. Also, the USDOT team agreed that the work should focus internally on coordination and communication, and also start off with a smaller group of stakeholders, and this is consistent with NCHRP 666 that suggests starting with a small achievable goal when implementing data governance within an organization, and then build upon it to achieve the organization's goal. As such, 11 stakeholder offices were identified to form the Mobility Data Coordination Group. And this group addresses data gaps and overlaps in roadway mobility data. The work group defines travel mobility data as speed and volume data, weather data, modal data, and data capture activities that are associated with wireless connected vehicle technologies. During phases 1 and 2 of the data business plan's development, The work group developed a vision, mission, goals, stakeholder definition and needs, data definitions, business practices and relationships, a charter with checklists and roles and responsibilities. We also identified work groups and finally developed a data governance framework. The outcome of this effort provides transparency and accountability. We also have more efficient ways of locating data and taking advantage of available data and information, and there will be standard data integration methods from multiple sources. Also, the processes and systems will reduce redundancies and promote consistencies in data results, whilst addressing timeliness of data and information and providing more department-wide spatial data tools. During a public meeting in 2014, I had the opportunity to inform external stakeholders about the data business plan and the benefits it promises as we move into the connected vehicle era. And our stakeholders, that is the external stakeholders, thought that there was the federal role for the government to provide assistance in facilitating the development of regional data business plans. And this my office agreed with. As such, Federal Highways Administration developed a draft guide to assist states, DOTs, and local agencies staff who are charged with mobility-related responsibilities to develop, implement, and maintain a tailored data business plan for roadway mobility data. The guide provides systematic instructions regarding stakeholder outreach, data assessment and improvement plans, data governance, processes and documents, and data management practices. The data business plan guide includes 9 steps, from establishing needs and objectives through gaps assessment and improvement strategies to developing implementation roadmap and eventually the development of the data business plan. The draft guide was first piloted with Hillsborough MPO, Mid-Atlantic Regional Council, and Maryland State. And based on lessons learned, it was refined and published as a final document together. This publication was made together with the 3 business plan pilots that we did with the mentioned states. Now, for cost reasons, Federal Highway Administration will no longer be doing full-blown pilots, but tailored workshops. To date, Federal Highway Administration has conducted a workshop with Atlanta Regional Council, San Diego Association of Governments, Nevada Department of Transportation, and there is a planned workshop for the Buffalo, Niagara area. If you are interested in the training, you could contact myself. I have my information at the end of the slide. And also Anita Vandervalk and we could be able to work with you. And as I move to the next slide, I will show you what the requirements are to be considered for a workshop or training in the development of your individual data business plan. First, the jurisdiction must identify regional partners that they will be working with. They must also receive concurrence from upper management, and the program must be in place. And lastly, you must be willing to allow USDOT to publish developed workshop-related documents. So going to the products, this is a snapshot of the guide that was developed and published with publication number. The next gives the pilot reports for the three sites: Maryland State Highway Administration, Mid-America Regional Council, and then the third is that of Hillsborough Metropolitan Planning Organization with their publication numbers and links. Over to you, Anita.
Thanks very much, Walter. Appreciate it. It was pointed out to me I did not introduce myself. I apologize for that. Walter did so. I'm Anita Vandervalk with Iteris. I've been working with Walter on this program for about 10 years, and we're working together with Cambridge Systematics to support Walter and Federal Highway and all of the states. At this point, I'm pleased to introduce Subrat Mahapatra, who is the Deputy Director at Maryland State Office of Transportation, Mobility, and Operations. He oversees the development and implementation of the TSMO and CAV programs. At Maryland DOT, Subrat spent 12 years in the Office of Planning, leading various data analytics and performance management efforts before moving to operations. Subrat has a master's in civil engineering from UMD College Park, and he is regarded as a national expert in TSMO and performance management. Subrat.
Thank you, Anita. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you guys are. Hope everything is well with you and your families and co-workers in these uncertain times. I wanted to start by thanking Federal Highway and NOCO for hosting this webinar and giving us this opportunity to talk about data business plan, data governance. I think this is an area that we all as peer DOTs, local agencies, local partners are talking as how do we leverage data streams with a proper governance structure that way we can make more informed decisions. And with that, I wanted to talk through three of these items. I wanted to give an overview of the data business plan pilot that Maryland DOT, State Highway Administration, Federal Highway to it earlier. I wanted to talk about that, and where I also wanted to talk about how we have taken some of those starting points to develop. There are some linkages and some lessons learned that we could leverage. And the third item is to talk about the data governance initiatives opportunities across the DOT, across different streams. As you heard, Walter, the data business plan pilot was more geared towards mobility applications, modal applications, but you could imagine how there are opportunities, whether it's asset management, performance management, anything that we do as in our day-to-day lives. There are applications there, and some of those applications and the principles applies there as well. So quick introduction to the data business plan pilot that we participated with Federal Highway late 2016, early 2017 on developing a mobility data business plan for MDOT SHA. So in nutshell, what it does is it gives a high-level action plan for improving mobility data and serves as informing the transportation systems management and operations TSMO data business plan and our programs. It identifies what are the lessons learned in the mobility arena that can be transferred to other transportation business units, other performance areas, and also recommends how MDOT SHA can take an agile approach, but again, rooted in data governance and sound data business practices. So as part of this data business plan, we went through the processes of stakeholder outreach. So when we look at mobility data, there are planning applications, there are policy applications, and there are operations applications. So we created a well-rounded stakeholder group, and then part of the stakeholder group, there was this stewardship from different entities, whether you are from operations, whether you are from a university research center, or whether you are in the planning and policy making part of the organization. And what we did was we took a page out of the capability maturity model template that is very prevalent. Many of you would probably know how you take a maturity exercise as an organization or with a group of stakeholders to see how mature are you in certain dimensions, whether it's business processes or systems and technologies, collaboration, so on and so forth. So we took a similar template and looked at all our data streams, whether it's our own agency data or whether it's private sector data or whether it's connected data. And many of you should not come as a surprise that some data are very good for planning purposes, but not for operations purposes, and vice versa. And again, as you look at the highway owner operator, arterials are not the same as the freeways. So something that is very mature on the arterials. So with this tiered approach, what we said was traffic volumes and traffic speeds were perhaps the most mature, but again, looking at arterials and freeways and for planning and operations, you get the idea. Together, we came up with that these are the levels of maturity that we collectively think as mobility data resides. But we also identified that the same template could take a tier 2 structure. I think we, with big data and other agency data, data streams, we are at a point where we can look at origin destination data, accessibility data, truck rate, work zone, signal timing. They are not as mature as the traffic volume and speed information, but I think those are good opportunity areas that many of us are dabbling at this point and trying to mainstream them. But here, the third tier is connected and automated vehicle. I know there is a lot of emphasis, Walter talked about it, the program areas and everything else. But again, together as an industry, we need to figure out, these are in early stages of maturity. I think everyone would agree to that. And then the whole idea is once you identify these tiers and maturity levels, the idea is how do you make sure that you are going to that next level of maturity that helps your organization and the customer experience. So kind of related, but there was an MDOT-wide initiative. Again, folks who may not know, we are kind of built like the US DOT, if you may. So the Maryland DOT as a whole, we are the highway agency, state highway administration that manages the interstates and non-tolled highways, but we also have motor vehicle administration, transit administration, port administration, transportation authority that manages our toll roads. So you can imagine as a collectively as an MDOT enterprise, you are getting data from all aspects, from strategic, tactical, and operational actions. You can look at it by mode. You can look at it by function, whether it's planning, engineering, operations, maintenance, you name it. And you can look at it by performance area, safety data, mobility data, asset management data. So when MDOT, as a department, looked at data streams, they went through an exercise of reaching out to all players across the organizations, across the TBUs, to make sure that we have an overarching data business plan that guides us. So again, this effort got approved and published in May of 2019. It makes references to the lessons learned from the Mobility Data Business Plan and also some other best practices that are out there, including some of the other federal highway pilots. And so this is a table of content that looks at what is the data governance, where do we want to be, the vision, goals, objectives, what did we learn, a gap analysis to see how we can go to that next level, and also talked about implementation activities. So the core principles and dimensions to agency-wide data governance in our experience goes back to the ASTO 7 principles that have been outlined. The data any data stream that we use as an agency, as an industry, should have all these aspects of valuable, available, validated, secure, clear, efficient, and accountable. Again, there is literature, ASTO references that talks more about it. But from an implementation standpoint, it comes down to people, processes, and technologies. On the people side of things, MDOT as an agency has taken some good steps, like identifying a chief data officer, looks at data synergies from an organizational standpoint, but also looking at individual program areas and areas and making sure that you have the processes and technologies in place to manage data. So talking about data management, this is a conceptual framework that the MDOT governance plan developed, identifying a staging area where agency data from different TBUs, big data from private sector, university information, everything, all flat files come into a staging area, and then you have the data marts and applications and users. Again, from a conceptual standpoint, it makes sense, but anyone can tell how easily this can become very complicated, and the implementation is part of the conversation as well. Switching gears, what I also wanted to share is some of the data opportunities and data business plan constructs that can inform our agency. So Maryland, for a couple of decades now, has been a leader in geospatial data. This starting from the overall administration, where irrespective of transportation, healthcare, safety statistics, crime statistics, everything goes into the Maryland IMAP. And that initiative, to be successful, had some very good standard operating procedures, having the data development policies, data sharing and security, data dictionaries, enterprise data inventories. So there were, we leverage, and we still continue to leverage the IMAP platform that enables our GIS, enterprise GIS data enterprises across our organization, but also the same data feeds into Maryland-wide initiatives. So there are some good case studies and lessons learned here. When you talk about traditional and big data applications, we all know that there are real-time applications, whether it comes to systems monitoring, incident management, active traffic management, integrated corridor management, maintenance, state of good repair activities. But there are also the archive data applications that looks at planning and TSMO, asset management, and all of them come together towards performance management. And giving a very high-level overview of what operations look like, this is, again, shouldn't be any surprise, but you have a whole host of data coming from the personal traveler side of things, on the agency side of things, from the private sector side of things, and all these, this system to smoothly operate, how there are huge opportunities in which you can leverage a good data business plan and governance plan that guides all these connecting platforms. So this is the chart, our chart, active traffic monitoring system is well established, but now we are looking for opportunities as how we can take the next step. We have good partners with the University of Maryland and other research centers that have done a lot of work in this realm. So there are partnerships that we are leveraging to take these steps. But again, making sure that the TNCs are accounted for, the new modes of travels are accounted for, the connected automated data streams that are coming online, those are accounted for. Again, we see there are some good foundations that we can build off, but again, the dynamics are changing, and we want to make sure how, when terabytes and petabytes of data streams are coming together, how do we make sense of it all? Long range and TSMO planning, this is again another area. It doesn't have to be real-time operations, but making sure that your safety data, existing asset information, traffic, mobility information inform your infrastructure investments, whether it's infrastructure conditions assessment and tying to the transportation performance management, TPM 1, 2, 3 activities. And in the end, there are asset management activities happening as an agency, as individual organizations. The whole idea is whether it's a Waze data stream telling us there is a pothole somewhere out there, or there is a customer complaint about infrastructure not working, or state of good repair needed. How do you make sense that you are collectively taking all these private sector inputs, public sector, our own agency inputs to take collective actions? So as next steps, this is where we are headed. We are looking at these new data streams and thinking, how does it work in the maturity framework that we have developed for mobility? How do we advance those advance to the next maturity scale? We are also looking at some everyday counts initiatives for crowdsourcing for operations, road weather management for starters, to say how do we make sense of these data streams, crowdsourced data, and formalize them into our processes. We are also looking at the work zone data exchanges and some of the other initiatives at Federal Highway to make sure that the common data exchanges, data platforms are synergized. So with that, again, we got started, but we have a long way to go. It's needless to say that the dynamics are changing every day, but this is an opportunity area that can help us go to the next level of organization in mobility. Thank you. And here is my contact information. Would love to get in touch with you, share our experience with yours, and thank you again. So Anita, back to you.
Great, thank you, Subrat. You do have a couple of questions in the chat box. I'll leave them for you to answer as we go through. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin. We're moving on to a representative from Mid-America Regional Council. Caitlin Zibers graduated from the University of Kansas with a master's in urban planning in 2016. Right after graduation, she worked for a small MPO in St. Joseph as a transportation planner and later as the MPO planning manager. She's been with MARC for a year and a half as a Planner 3, where she supports all things data and technology within transportation, including the 2020 Department Data Business Plan and the 5-state Heartland Freight Technology Plan. Caitlin, we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you. So I want to give a little bit of context about Mid-America Regional Council. For those of you who have not been familiar with this agency, we are in the center of the country. We're in the Kansas City metropolitan area, so we are by state. And we are a regional council, so while we are considered a TMA within the MPO structure, we also have other departments, like our area agency on aging. We handle 911 and emergency response and community development. So we're a fairly large department, and that'll come into play as we talk about our data planning initiatives. My role at MARC, while I handle all things data and technology, my main role within this sphere is to really act as a liaison between two of our departments. The first is Transportation and Environment. That's our traditional NPO department and our Research Services department. So that's kind of the structure we'll be talking about as we work through that. We are fortunate that we have a department focused on data and data analysis. So that's very helpful. We call them our Research Services department. I also work with congestion management and performance measures. So a lot of that comes into play as we move along. So looking at our data business planning at MARC, it really began in 2016 with this pilot plan that we adopted a few years ago now. This plan was prior to me starting. My predecessor, Jim Hubble, actually led that effort. and it was an agency-wide plan. So this tried to include every department we had, not just the MPO, but it tried to take a more holistic approach. It tried to encourage kind of team building and identify some champions within each department. But most importantly, what it really did was it identified the amount of foundational work we needed to do before we could really get moving with a plan like this. It identified the needs for inventories and internal coordination and laid out kind of a roadmap of what that could look like. So in the intervening years, we've really focused in on foundational work. And what that looks like for us at MARC is really taking care of our house internally. I always have to remind staff it's exciting to look at all of these tools and these software platforms and things we can do externally, but we have to get our house in order and we have to get things organized and cleaned up before we move to that phase. So we've been doing a lot of behind-the-scenes work that none of our members really see, nobody outside notices, and it looks like things like a geospatial inventory, so really documenting all of the data sets that we have, creating a metadata database, which is very fun if you've ever had to sit down and actually slog through recording metadata. We've also been working on putting together a systems inventory, so that looks at all the software and systems that we use agency-wide. And a publications inventory. This is something we recently did in preparation for our new data business plan. This publications inventory is really looking at everything that we have published out there for the public or our members. So it's looking at plans, websites, web apps, web maps, anything that we have put out there for public consumption to get a better handle of what we have facing the public and what data and resources is feeding that. So a lot of that foundational work has led to the need and the desire to do an update to this pilot plan that we originally created in 2016. So we entered into a contract early this year with a consultant called Ummel Group International. They're based out of Lawrence. And we are hoping to turn around an update to this plan in October of this year. Really, we'll have the meat of it by mid-August is our goal. And what we've done with this plan is we looked at the previous and we looked at the steps that, we hadn't gotten to or that we need to narrow down, and we realized we really needed to narrow the scope. As an agency-wide plan, this ended up just being too large all at once. So we decided to scale it back and really focus in on the MPO components of the agency and to better integrate this with our UPWP, which is our budget process. We've also done some work. We've begun migrating databases in addition to the foundational work and started to outline some of our future work around a member portal that members could log into and access data and a variety of other things. So that's kind of where we have been and where we're headed for this data business planning within MARC. Like I said, our current state of affairs is really focused on getting our internal documentation set up and our internal processes recorded before we move to our external relationships with our members. We have in the last few years had different agreements and partnerships with agencies like Replica, MySlidewalk, some of these data providers and platforms, and we're trying our best to hold off on pursuing those until we have our internal stuff kind of set up. And it's very difficult because I think that's where the exciting work really is. So digging a little bit into our 2020 plan deliverables, I wanted to give you a better idea of what our data business plan is specifically looking for and what we're getting out of it. The first is really to identify upcoming projects and plans and their associated needs, and there's a horizon of 3 years on that. The idea of this plan is it's going to be completely internal. It's not going to be approved by the board. It's just a working document for us. To identify those needs, we're going to start, and we already have started, with one-on-one interviews with every department member. So we've done about 40 interviews, one-on-one between our consultants and staff members to identify their projects and plans coming up and any needs that are associated with that, either data or technology. We're following up with that. So we just wrapped that up last week. We're following up with that on small group facilitated conversations, so starting to suss out themes and group topics and get people together. We did this for a few reasons. We have a lot of introverts at MARC. a lot of introverts in our department. We wanted to make sure every single person had the opportunity to individually contribute to this plan. Because one of the reasons we feel the 2016 plan didn't advance as quickly as we wanted it to was because we didn't see a lot of ownership from every staff member. There were a few of those champions and staff leads that did great, but as we had staff turnover, we saw this slow down and stall out a bit. So we want to make sure that every single person in our department can see themselves in this plan, and they can look to this regularly. So that's where we started on one-to-one. We're moving to small groups. From there, we're really going to move into assessing our inventories that we've created and assessing staff capacity to meet those needs that we've identified. So that'll look like a gap analysis and your typical SWOT analysis, things like that. But what's really important here that we haven't done yet, even in the previous plan, is dig into a detailed capacity assessment. So looking at not only do we have the number of staff that we need, but do the staff we have, do they have the technical skills and training to meet the data and technology needs associated with these projects and plans? Can they run the models? Can they use GIS? Are they proficient in Excel enough to do the analyses? So really looking at, where are maybe some weak spots within our staff technical capacity. From there, we're going to move on to recommending data purchasing, software upgrades, and staff training. So really looking at how do we shore things up and what sort of purchases do we need to do, a year in advance. We struggle sometimes to plan out some of these longer term projects, and we want to get ahead of them. So we are integrating this with the budget, our UPWP process, and we're really hoping to target our spending within there. I think it's very easy, for My Sidewalk or Replica or Streetlight, all of these data providers that are doing really interesting work, they'll reach out to us on projects and we get excited. But what we're trying to do is slow down and say, let's meet our basic needs first. Let's identify those. Let's identify what we need. Let's target our spending to meet them first, and then we'll look at expanding. So again, a lot of foundational work that's not a lot of fun. But in the long run, it'll set up a solid foundation so we can really grow and expand rapidly. Part of that is also identifying that training for staff, but we're also going to create what I'm calling staff core competencies. So as we continue to get staff turnover, bring in new staff members, or interview and hire interns, what are the core competencies that we as an agency have decided we need to have at all times to maintain a certain level of technical capacity? We don't have that written in anywhere. So really sitting down, figuring that out together as a group, coming to consensus about where we want to go as a department. And then all in all, this is going to culminate in a 10-page plan. So super short, super simple. This is supposed to be a living document that will be updated annually as part of the UPWP budget cycle. So every summer as we start to prepare our budget, this will be part of the UPWP discussions. We'll pull out the next year's worth of data and technology recommendations and line it up with our budget and see what priorities rise to the top and where we should be spending our funds. I should also mention through this entire process, we're really looking for redundancies and opportunities to automate. We tend to struggle, and I'm going to be honest here, we tend to struggle as a department with silos. We have staff members who've been with us for a very long time. They're very good at what they do. And as a result, we tend to see very little cross-training and succession planning. So this plan, outside of, all of these deliverables we just went through, it's also supposed to help elevate and expose a lot of the work that our colleagues are working on so that we have a better sense of what we're doing as a department and how what we're working on can support each other, and maybe where there's opportunity for cross-training, succession planning, and breaking down some of those silos a lot of larger agencies tend to see. So from a practical standpoint, I wanted to share with you today some of the best practices that we've pulled together in the last few years we've been in this data business planning sort of realm. And the first is really documentation. We'll dive into each of these in the following slides, but documentation for me rises to the top above everything else. I think that's partly because I have only been with MARC a year and a half, and diving right in, it has been a struggle to get up to speed on all of the processes and internal ways of doing things. Specific examples of that, we've created a metadata platform so we could better track our metadata. We've begun database mapping with our staff. And we've even started doing application storyboarding. If you're familiar with development, that looks like requirements gathering, user stories. And a lot of this comes from our department to that research services department who's doing some of this technical work and building a lot of these applications for us. We've also been looking at encouraging data ownership. And we've had some pretty good success in the last year or so of that. We've created some linked Excels, which are Excel tables that are linked to our database. So a lot of our database structure is in SQL. A lot of our transportation staff don't know how to use SQL. So we figured out ways to put that data into a software that they understand, they're comfortable using, and that looks like linking up Excel worksheets so that they can easily get in there and play with the data. Same thing with the Access editing tools. A lot of them were familiar with Access databases, so we're able to actually allow them to edit data within the SQL database by using an Access front-end form. And that's been great. They haven't had to learn SQL, but they've still been able to get in and clean up their data and take care of it and take ownership of it. And we've also been doing things like naming protocols. Again, not fun, but full disclosure. I went into our long-range plan folder the other day on the server, and I got 7 layers deep, and I found a folder named New Stuff. So I'm sure everybody has an example of that. Naming protocols in general, they're not fun, but they're something that's necessary in building that foundation. And then the last item is really project management and communication. So like I said, my role is varied, but I really fit in this in-between space between our research services department and our transportation staff. So I'm constantly translating what transportation wants to research services and the issues that research services faces back to transportation because they really speak different languages. And that's where the documentation comes into play, but also project management and communication. So we've begun using softwares and tools like Team Gantt and Trello to better communicate what we want and when we want it by, who's responsible, what sort of dependencies are there within the schedule, and conducting regular touch bases like project stand-ups. That project management is really not a difficult thing, but it's a massive cultural shift. It is a mindset shift that we're trying to implement within our agency. So digging a little bit deeper into some of these examples, looking at documentation, this is an example of our metadata documentation platform. We created this in-house. Our data developer, Sarah, is phenomenal. She loves building these sorts of things. It's a form that our staff can go in and they can add data sources, add a web service, a web map, or an application. They can also edit those. And all of this is stored in the back end in a database, so we can run queries. We can look up, this one data set, what is it feeding into? How many web maps is it going into? Where on the website is it going? And this is just a quick snip of some of the things that we're asking for. I wanted to highlight, though, we've drilled down into who is the data steward. So who's the responsible department, program, or agency? Who's the sponsor? Who's the internal maintainer, right? Some of those questions we've not asked in the past, and that came out of that first plan of really identifying who's responsible for what and who should have ownership over what. And in the beginning, I know this might look beyond the capabilities of some smaller NPOs. I'm always sensitive to that, coming from a small NPO myself. But this was just an Excel spreadsheet. It was super simple. We put it together in Excel, and over time, we were able to put this platform together in a really easy user interface. Another example of documentation, and I apologize, this is pretty small. It's more for the visual, so don't worry about reading the specifics. But the top part are all of our web pages, and the bottom part is our SQL database environment. And this is one of the things that we've been walking our transportation staff through. They're actually not allowed to meet with research services on a project until they've done this. They have to sit down and they have to look at their project and look at what tables exist, what web pages exist, how are those feeding, what applications are there, and what is the relationship between the data in the database and the front-end user experience side. And this is something we've done lots of training on, we continue to do training on, and it helps our transportation staff start to understand all of the work behind this. It's like lifting the hood of a car. They really start to see how this is all functioning. And it's been really important in helping them understand how to use the data and how to analyze it and update it and what that's going to affect if they make edits here and there. Another example is really storyboarding, and I love this because I'm such a visual person, and I find this is one of the best ways to communicate. If you're trying to work with planners and data developers and data analysts, you have to find some form of communication that they both understand, a language that they can both speak. And for us, it is like this. So this is an example of a web page on an application form that we wanted developed from scratch. So we took kind of some existing pieces, we threw it in a PowerPoint, we dropped in text boxes, and really we dug in and identified functionalities, right? Not just what we want it to physically look like, but when you click this button, where does it redirect you? And are there character limits? And you know, we want this to recall from the database everything that's submitted, these sorts of details that our developers need to do. This is great documentation. It helps us communicate, but it also helps us stay on track because it's really easy when we're in these projects for them to snowball and get out of control, and you have scope creep. Everybody always has great ideas halfway through the project, so this also helps us stay on track as well. It's good accountability for everybody. Moving into data ownership, I mentioned the linked Excels and the Access editing tool. This is just a snip of what that looks like. It looks just like an Access database. But what it does is we can set permissions so the project owner can go in and they can make edits to the data in here. And as they're making edits in these fields, it is actually editing the data in SQL. For us, this was important. Now, I would love for everybody to be trained up and have the technical skills to work within SQL and do all of this themselves, but that's just not the reality of how a large agency like ours works. So we had to come in the middle and find something that our staff is comfortable with, but still allows them to have ownership of their data. And this has been great. Before we implemented this, we were constantly fielding emails from staff wanting to know, what did so-and-so submit on their application, or what do we have in the database for this project or this program? Now they can just go look themselves. They can look, they can make edits if they see typos, if they have a project sponsor call and say, I submitted the wrong budget, I accidentally added a 0, they can correct it. So we've given them the power and the autonomy to actually make small controlled edits to their data. And we've seen a great response from that. So that's been a great use of this tool to increase data ownership. And then lastly, this project management adoption. This has been an ongoing struggle. This is a snip of a Gantt chart we've put together for one of our projects. Project management is kind of here or there within our agency. Everybody kind of uses a tool that they find comfortable. Some may not use anything at all. But as part of our documentation and communication, we're really pushing the adoption of things like Gantt charts and project management tools, team-based project management, to help us communicate and stay on track. And I think that is very important in making progress on some of these deliverables that we're looking for. And lastly, I wanted to identify some challenges and obstacles. So we've reviewed some of the best practices we found over the last few years, but we still constantly face challenges and obstacles, and this will only continue as we grow and work on our external relations. Setting aside time and dedicating staff has been an issue. That's where my role really evolved over the last year and a half into this role that I'm filling now between the two departments. One thing we find, though, is a lot of data business planning, like I said, it's foundational. It's not fun. No one's ever going to see it. If you're doing it right, nobody will know you're doing it. And because of that, it's a really high priority, but it's low urgency. By that I mean it's very important and critical to your day-to-day operations, but you can kind of get by for a while without doing it. We've also faced a lack of data ownership within the department. We're starting to see that turn around with more open access to data and the ability to edit data and influence data and analyze it. But we're still faced with a low level of technical skills, and that's where we're currently in conversations for our budget next year. That's where I see us really starting to ramp up and be intentional with our staff training around those technical skills that are needed. We have had high staff turnover in the last year and a half or so, 2 years. A lot of people, economy is great. A lot of people went private. So again, for me, documentation is key. How do we document all of these efforts in a way that when we do lose staff or they're promoted or they move on, we can keep those efforts going forward and we don't lose that institutional knowledge. And then ultimately, every agency will face this, navigating cultural change. Everything we discussed, it's not technically difficult. Everything we've done so far has been MacGyvered Excel sheets and access databases and spreadsheets and mapping things out in PowerPoint. It's not high tech. It's really not difficult. But what it is it's challenging the status quo and it's challenging an existing culture and pushing for change. And that is where we see the largest challenge. And we're hoping through these intentional data business planning efforts, by actually putting in place this data business plan, we will have all come to a consensus about the culture we want to see and the steps we need to take to get there. And that's what I have for you today. My contact information is there. Feel free to give me a call or send me an email if you have any follow-up questions or want examples that I shared with you.
Outstanding presentation, Caitlin. Thank you so much. That was very, very good. A lot of good discussion going on in the question and discussion box. Keep that going. And Caitlin, you can go ahead and address your questions as we go. Again, thank you for that. At this time, I'm going to turn over to Nevada DOT. This is our most recent workshop. Rod Schilling from Nevada will be speaking. We were on site with Rod and others in Nevada DOT in late January, which seems like it's eons ago at this point, and worked with them to begin looking at their data business planning efforts. Mr. Rod Schilling has been with Nevada Department of Transportation since March of 1999. Past experience includes 13 years of construction along with 4 years in the United States Navy. His career with the department includes working in roadway design, materials, and the Traffic Operations Division, where he currently is working as Assistant Chief of Traffic Operations. Most recently, Rod has been involved in the department's statewide strategic data governance plan, specifically looking at how to integrate the Smart Mobility Data Initiative. Rod is a graduate from the University of Nevada, Reno, with a Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering and has a professional engineering license with the state of Nevada. He's also a registered PTOE with the Transportation Professional Certification Board. Rod, I'm turning it over to you.
All right, thank you, Anita. And thanks, Walter, and everybody else for attending in this webinar today. I'll do the same kind of thing with Caitlin. I'll give a little bit of a background of the department. We're approximately 1,800 employee within 3 different districts for the state of Nevada. Little history on that too. Demographics-wise, we're very rural in nature, so we have a lot of remote areas. The connectivity and interoperability is very challenging for us. We also have a
Rod, we lost you. Are you there? Nilo, can you hear me?
Yes, it seems like his phone dropped. So let's give him a minute to get back.
PowerPoints, and they will all be available for download during the Q&A session. They'll also be available on the website later, but you can download them directly when we get to Q&A. Okay, Rod, turning it back.
Well, you know, kind of ironic, I was just talking about, and I don't know if you heard it, but I was talking about the remote rural connectivity issues here in Nevada, and then oddly enough, I was dropped. So, yeah. But anyway, and I don't know if you guys heard or not, but a little bit of the background too for the state of Nevada. We operate on a separate network, you know, for all of our ITS. So we're separate from the enterprise side of the house. We use the center-to-center protocol, and we have a data exchange that uses the ITE standard for the Traffic Management Data Dictionary. So kind of like what Caitlin talked about earlier on, when you go through that process and you're clicking everything that's mandatory or, you know, something that you recommend or something like that, there's a lot of things that go into the side of the metadata. So we've done that. We've been incorporating that throughout the state for quite some time. And also, you know, we've recognized another side of the house with our TAMP program with all of our ITS elements too. So we wanted to make sure we kept that moving forward as we incorporate anything to do with our data governance. And then back to the workshop, which was very helpful, and thanks to Walter and Anita for helping us facilitate that. That was back in February, so we're very early in this process, you know, looking at our data mobility governance. So we did come up with a lot of summary of needs. Consistency is one of the big things that we want to do, and have standards, be able to share all of the data, not just internally, but also across the regions. Have that collaboration, coordination amongst our stakeholders, establish some agreements. What are their roles and responsibilities, you know, for their stake in this as well, and make sure it's up to date and keep it maintained. Maintenance of the data is one of the huge items that we wanted to make sure that we keep going forward. You know, that ownership, the consistency, and making sure, you know, that you have sharing of that data in the inventory, cataloging everything. There's a lot there that resides in how to do that and access it. You need a champion. We recognize that too, to help this, to make sure it moves forward, and that you have the data stewards established as well. You know, make it as systematic and automated as much as possible. Anything to do with manual, it takes a lot of effort and workforce and resources to do that. And most people are challenged in that area. So, and the analytics to support that, you know, the performance metrics, we recognize that that's one of the huge sides of everything that you want to do with your data side too, is to establish those metrics and be transparent. You know, the awareness for all of your agencies and your groups, and respect to all of those data initiatives. You know, have that platform and that framework ready to go. So since that workshop, we've been doing a lot of work, even with, you know, the recent activities of COVID, and it's really slowed down a lot of the process, but the telecommuting really hasn't hindered much here at the department. In fact, maybe it's even improved some of the processes that we've done, because we also work in an IT Scrum process, so it's really helped facilitate some of that, you know, moving forward. Data visualization, the analytics, we want to make sure that we have that, like we were talking about. We do have our own asset management program right now. We do a dashboard. We want to start bringing that forward, you know, a little bit more robust, and bring that out, you know, not just internally, but externally. Also pay attention to some of the data privacy and the cybersecurity. We recognize that. Also, you know, look at your linear system with everything, the GIS side of it, what it is within your network. Make sure you keep that on track as well. In addition to that, make sure that you do have a good return on your investment when you do this. That's part of the whole performance metrics. And when I was talking about our TAMP earlier on, when we recognized our ITS assets, we didn't want to just look at just what the manufacturer's recommended life is on that. What is a good metric, you know, and have that transparency with that data visualization, and be able to show that the data and infrastructure that you're putting out there does have a good return on your investment. Establish those guidelines. Make sure that we're all sharing that, the same across the board. Prioritization. You know, one of the programs that we're doing is our TSMO program, and we just completed that, which is very helpful. That's going to help us do a lot of things as far as our project prioritization, our needs with our data, have targets with the monies associated to those, and also with our asset management program. We have a pretty good program currently for our ITS side of the house, but we want to make sure that that's robust and sharing across all regions. I just talked about our TSMO program plan. Our director just this May executed it, and we're now moving forward with that throughout the department. We're going to start incrementally looking at how we implement that and how it's specific to areas within the department, and make sure we mainstream that throughout the agency. She's very encouraging throughout the whole department that we work collaboratively on this and recommendations with those steps to instill TSMO in all of our everyday business. And this is very good too. And recently too, which is really good news, we have a WSDO TSMO committee that was just developed, and our director is the interim chair. So that's very helpful for us as well. Some of the future plans that we're looking to do after we held this workshop, one of the first things we wanted to do is to establish a regional coordination group. I think this is probably one of the best activities that we can do, and we have some focus areas with that. The idea is, first and foremost, kind of same thing, look at your strengths, your weaknesses, look at the SWOT, everything associated to that. Start identifying, some of those problem areas. Look at your existing data, start sharing some of those, develop that data business plan, pull your resources and everything else associated with that, the standardization, the framework. In addition to what we've done here, when we held that workshop back in February, we also included our enterprise side of the house. We did our performance sections, our roadway systems, and what that did is it also helped initiate some other areas within the department, and that helped establish also an overall departmental strategic data plan. So our mobility data plan is going to be working in alliance with that, and I think that's very helpful as we do this. Part of that regional coordination group, what we said, from that overall departmental strategic data plan, what we did is outline some of these areas that we wanted to look at, and the regional coordination group was one of the first things that we wanted to target. And looking at everything, you've got to start with your inventory, of course, and keep that up to date, and start looking at how we can establish that core group and keep it small was one of the things we wanted to make sure we focused on, and have some action items out of that, and some targets for everybody, just to keep that interest and assign the teams so that they're smaller and they have those targets to work towards. And I just talked about it a little bit earlier. One thing good about this is when we started establishing, our mobility data governance plan, the department took a look at it, and then we're also paralleling those efforts. We established a committee, and that just started here recently, and it's the Enterprise Data and Analytics Program Governance Committee. We're going to start meeting every 2 months, and it commences this August. We're one of the team members in that, of course, and we're working together with the overall departmental-wide strategic data governance plan. We drafted our first strategic data plan. We have that developed. It aligns with what the action items came out of the workshop, and it also parallels with all of the efforts, that was provided to us from the manual from the US DOT Roadway Mobility Data Coordination Group. So we want to make sure as we do this that our mobility data business plan and all of those efforts are aligning with the overall MDOT strategic data plan. We've noted that within ours, and we've also listed some of the dates and everything. We have like 10 action items. The regional coordination group is one of the first things that we want to do. And then it also parallels with our ongoing efforts with our TSMO program plan. And keeping track with our technology group, we got two different sides within traffic operations. And the technology group was with everything associated with our asset management program. We do have some best practices we'd like to share as well. From the Traffic Management Center Pooled Fund Study Group, we were the champions for one of the projects, which was the performance measures and health index of the ITS assets. So from that, that was just completed here recently. Coming up in September 10th, there's another webinar that's going to be hosted through the TMC Pool Fund study. And MDOT was a case study, and we could easily share a lot of that information that established some of the guidelines in relationship to the health index of those ITS assets. This ties back into the TAM and everything else too. So MDOT was one of the few states that recognized that within our TAM. There's a few other states, and we can share some of that information if others are interested, from like Utah and Georgia as well. Also from our TSMO program, we recognize the ITS assets within our business plan there too. We can be able to share a lot of that information. We did some best practice research through that program that looks at some of the same things. We have a 3-year implementation plan that's ongoing right now to take a look at our statewide ITS assets and looks at some of the other strategies, not just only NDOT's, but we have several other states that we've collected some of this information, including Caltrans, UDOT, Oregon, Arizona, and so forth. So if you guys are interested and would like some of those best practices, we could easily share that information with you as well. Also from the workshop, what we did is we recognized some of the challenges and gaps. It's not just, the maintaining of the data. It's also sharing of the data. And same thing as most agencies, keeping that conversation moving. Your daily routine, it's busy. Everybody is got their workloads and that type of thing going, but we need to make sure that we keep the data sharing moving forward. Maybe we just have to establish a project to ensure that there's some type of commitment to make sure that we're moving this plan and keeping this data plan development moving. The cultural change, you've heard discussions on that as well. Most agencies, we too have those challenges, especially now, with COVID. We've had a lot of hiring freezes, and we're going through that, so we have shortfalls within the department. Keeping that moving forward is really difficult, especially with respect to technology. We recognize that as well within our TSMO program. We want to look at our workforce and the development moving forward with respect to technology. The other thing too is your timeliness, accuracy within that data too. And what is the relevance? What does it mean when you start doing all of this stuff with your data? Also, where to get the data. There's so many areas out there within the department. It's amazing where all of those different data sources are at. And again, when you start looking at your workforce, do you have the expertise to deal with that amount of data? There's so many terabytes out there, and be able to use that information in an insightful way. You look at your performance metrics, whether they're MAP 21s or whatever. What does it mean to the average motorist out there and everything else? So we want to make sure that this information is useful. Pay attention to the cybersecurity as well as you're moving forward. And the capability of the data. There is so much information out there that you can do, especially as you start working into the artificial intelligence. We've started working into that, and I think that is another area of technology advancement, and I think it's working well for us too. Document your business processes, the formatting of everything. There's, the standardization. We started doing some of that early on with some of the mobility data with the CAV side of the house. So have that common platform. Make sure that that data is able to be shared and published and subscribed, not just internally, but with your external partners as well. Again, we were talking about the performance measures and the data visualization. Have those metrics established, So it's not just, looking at the recommended life from the manufacturer, but what does it really mean? What is the uptime? And how does it affect the rest of the performance on that segment of the road? Standardization of the data. We have 3 different districts, and, getting everybody on the same page, you got to work through those hurdles. Again, we talked about that lack of a champion to be able to organize and share all of this, and the workforce development. So NOCO, looked at some of the TSMO efforts, and they've established a lot of these positions to work, into the future with technology. We've identified some of those. We're trying to incorporate that into our TSMO program within the department and start focusing internally. We recognize that we too need two different positions, to keep this moving forward. And it's hard to do that, especially, on the challenge with the financial hurdles that we're going through, and most agencies are doing the same thing. And have a decision support system. We're working in different areas. You want to have, targets to reach with, the value of that money. And so we have different programs, and we're trying to analyze which one would be the best one. We have one that we use through our TSMO program for investment prioritization. And there's other areas within the department, but we want to align those efforts, so that we're all on one page. And there is my contact information as well, so if there's any further questions or anything you would like to ask, please do so there. And I'd like to turn it back over to Anita.
Thanks, Rod. Outstanding presentation. I love the diversity of these presentations. I hope everybody's getting a lot out of this. Okay, let us turn on, and timing is fine. Keep the questions coming in the Q&A. We have 2 more presentations to go. We're going to turn now to the Atlanta Regional Commission. Kofi Wakhisi is our presenter. He works in the Transportation Access and Mobility Group at ARC, supervising the Regional Planning and External Coordination Team. This team is responsible for carrying out the federal planning process relating to active modes, freight and logistics, transportation system management and operations, livability, and transportation equity. Kofi is an ITS Georgia board member, participates in numerous TRB research panels and committees, and is the current technical committee chair of the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations, AMPO. Kofi holds a Bachelor of Civil Engineering and a Master of City and Regional Planning from Georgia Tech, and a doctorate degree from Georgia State University. He is a member of the Georgia Bar and the American Institute of Certified Planners. Kofi, we're turning it over to you.
Thank you, Anita. Good afternoon, good day, everyone. So the flavor, like Anita mentioned, is great. The variety is great, and what I wanted to, what I was asked to present was kind of sort of maybe a more of a conceptual overview of what is going on as it relates to regional data coordination in the Metro Atlanta area. And so I've got these 4 items that I wanted to touch on, and so I'll just jump right to it. We conducted a DBP workshop last year. It was around May, and these are some of the key findings from that workshop. Now, the folks that attended that workshop, or I should say the agencies, was vast. We had Georgia DOT, the State Roadway and Toll Authority, ARC, of course, which is the MPO for the Metro Atlanta Planning Area, TMA, and we had within GDOT several members from different offices and departments. And some of the things that we identified in terms of what our needs are going forward as of last year was this first one, which was inventory and cataloging all the data that all of these organizations and agencies have at their fingertips, at least as of 2019. And the reason why that was so important is because it was a prevailing, I guess, conclusion or observation during the workshop that one agency didn't know what the other agency had with respect to data. So therefore, maybe the other agency should not have purchased a redundant data set or a very similar data set. And also, sometimes we run into data collection issues, which many of you know could thwart the schedule of project delivery or planning process. And so it was important that we at least kind of get on the same page as far as what is the landscape of existing data assets in the region. And then that would have led to, or would lead to better coordination on future data purchases within agencies, and so on and so forth. And all of my presenters, fellow presenters before me, have touched on how they've been able to accomplish these through their data programs. And so I would say that in the Atlanta area, while any one agency may be very robust in terms of its data program, I would say that for the entire region, not so much collectively. And so, so that was just a quick overview of what we identified during the DBP workshop. And there's a summary, of course, just like every workshop, which I could make available to all of the audience. Now, moving on to our TSMO vision and ITS architecture update, which we just completed in June. We started that effort in 2018, so we started it before we conducted the workshop. But one of the tasks in the TSMO strategy was sort of like an exclusive independent task, was to do a best practices white paper on data governance. And we knew that going into the RFP and the scope of work for the TSMO vision that we needed to have some sort of component that gets us closer to dealing with all of the different flavors, use cases, scales of all the data we think that we would need as a region when it comes to promoting, planning, and delivering TSMO strategies. So I'm going to touch on some of the highlights of that, but I just want to mention that we didn't do a standalone data sort of exchange or data governance workshop. It was basically folded into our overall TSMO approach, which is kind of unique, but I think the whole point was we needed to catch up on a lot of things, including just overall TSMO strategy and ITS architecture update, that we didn't want to sort of have to prolong the data exchange conversation. And hopefully we make the data exchange data governance report a lot more relevant to TSMO. So moving on to data governance, like I mentioned, this was a specific task in our TSMO plan. And there were 4 steps that were recommended in the white paper based on some peer review, also on some best practices and guidance from Federal Highway and US DOT. And I just want to walk through these 4 steps because, you know, like I said before, any one of these or all of these steps was occurring individually across different agencies, like, for example, at GDOT. And even within GDOT offices, Georgia DOT offices, they would have their own sort of data governance or data management practices. And, you know, looking at it from the outside, it was kind of makes it hard to coordinate with a DOT, a large organization like that, when you're dealing with different data stewards, different data standards, different data update cycles from one agency. And we rely very heavily on our state DOT for a lot of the data for so many purposes, as you can imagine, in the planning realm. So collectively, we need to all contemporaneously go through all these steps. That would be the recommendation. And I'm happy to say that step 1 has been completed, but guess what? I think that is more of an ongoing process. So I think step 1 is sort of more of a underlying activity that needs to happen very frequently. Step 2, coming up with a short-term action plan and identifying or populating the data catalog. That's kind of completed / in the works. And when I say short-term action plan, I'll get to that in a second. It kind of segues into one of the follow-up items I want to discuss relative to what Georgia DOT has initiated. Third is identify stewardship strategy. So this gets at sort of identifying the business rules and protocols for handling, managing, exchanging, updating the data. And then fourth, formalize all of this into a charter or some sort of official document that holds all of these agencies accountable for executing all of these steps and keeping to standards and honoring each other's work activity in a way that will make the data most useful to us. So like I said, sort of a short-term plan. This kind of all, I don't want to use the word, I'll use the word osmosis, but there may be a better word. Sort of an organic process. The timing couldn't have been better. We started the TSMO plan. That was underway. That had a data exchange report, data governance report. We conducted the Federal Highway Data Business Plan workshop. We had a lot of success and traction after that. And I think that all culminated into GDOT's work. And specifically, I got to give credit to Matthew Glasser, who works in the in the Office of Traffic Operations. And he reached out to ARC and the State Roadway and Toll Authority, and said, and even reached out to all of his fellow counterparts within GDOT, like the Office of Transportation Data, the Office of Planning, the Office of Program Delivery, so on and so forth, and developed a statewide data research document, which would lead to, and you can see what the objectives here were, and a lot of these objectives were very similar to the steps I just itemized from the data exchange data governance report. It mounted into a notion of consolidating and pooling our data purchasing. And this document sort of helped put together a cost and try to quantify how much we would need, what kind of program, data program we would need based on all of our collective and individual needs. And it helps identify where we would share and streamline data resources. And so this cost, these are very, very, very rough numbers. And, but these costs would justify so many things that I think in the Atlanta region we had not quantified, or just so many issues that we had not quantified or monetized. Like, for example, what is the cost of delaying preliminary engineering for a major roadway expansion or a managed lanes project to go out and collect traffic, to conduct a traffic report, which includes collecting traffic data, when, you know, maybe 50% of the traffic data or locations of where we want to collect traffic, whether it's turning movement counts, volume, et cetera, have already been collected individually by, say, a local government, the MPO, through another planning study that was adjacent or overlapping the study area, or even within GDOT in a different office. So if you start to, there's this multiplier effect when you start to understand, if you can identify the total cost for what kind of data we would need for all the different purposes, and compare that to the money lost and the time saved when it comes to going out and having to collect that data ad hoc or spontaneous, etc. It was a phenomenal notion. And the problem is, or has been, that we collectively didn't realize that cost or those savings. And I can provide more information on that initiative as well. So I'm moving on to the fourth item that I wanted to present and just give an overview of, which is State Road and Tollway Authority's Enterprise Data Plan. Now, they're CERTA, that's a commonly referred to name. They are a unique organization. You can see up here at the top of the slide these different agencies, 3 different agencies. They are all essentially, they are by law separate agencies, and by law they are state agencies, but guess what? They all are co-located in the same office. They're administratively attached, and the leadership is entirely the same across all 3 as far as the executive leadership. And so they independently felt the need and the desire because of, I think mostly because of the need to be more responsive and more proactive with performance management for their toll assets, managed lanes assets, and the express bus operations, which that's what the ATL authority now handles. They wanted to be much more responsive. And what they realized through their enterprise data plan, which was also completed this year, they realized that there is a sort of a culture within their organization or organizations that they needed to espouse to become more proactive. And I really love the outcome and the results of this plan, because it sort of speaks to the organizational behavior and the organizational culture and sort of more of the corporate type of mentality that public agencies might need to adopt partially to kind of help get us more, help agencies internally and externally become more cohesive when it comes to performance management, which obviously relies on data, the data wherewithal to compile and manage data. And you can see here this sort of stepwise approach going up the ladder. And this is almost like, I guess you can look at it as a maturity model that they've identified through their work and you could say they determined that they were at the tactical phase, where you're looking at siloed information, siloed data, and you know, I've already beaten that dead horse throughout my presentation as far as how that exists within agencies and across agencies. And you know, the idea is to become data-driven, and that might not necessarily be the case for all organizations to be solely data-driven, and I'm sure it won't be the case for CERTA, ATL Authority, and Greta. But you know, the idea is to, if from a data perspective, you need to be data-driven. You can't be unaware of what data you don't have or have, and you can't just be tactical, which is the one-off data request from an angry elected official or disgruntled elected official who wants to know a particular thing that can only be answered with data, but you couldn't readily respond to it because you don't have that data-driven mentality in the first place, and you don't have those institutional business processes set in place. And so this is sort of, I'm going to show you two slides, this one and the next one, to just kind of, I guess, wrap up what, you know, this data plan, this enterprise plan did for these agencies. And so you look at, on the far left of the slide, you look at this sort of decentralized data management, data curation process that the agencies had. And you want to migrate into sort of at the very far right, be able to translate how do you go from decentralized silo data to a well-defined performance management system when you're speaking to performance objectives and monitoring and tracking that. And so what this enterprise data plan did for them was essentially consolidate, sort of try to wrap our collective heads around all these data sources, all the data owners, and then try to put that in the context of a use of all the different use cases and all the different purposes and all the different stewards that would be responsible for answering questions based on data, which would thus get them to be more apt at developing a comprehensive business intelligence environment. And I love that. This is the part that, this is why I wanted to highlight this. This has really little to do with the MPO as far as contribution to this effort, but we are going to, as much as we can, adopt and embrace the outcome and the work that led into this as much as we can, because I think it relates back to how do you get to the most appropriate data governance framework, data exchange protocols, and a lot of that's driven by business intelligence, and that's kind of how I think we ought to start looking at data, at data itself. It's a commodity. It's something that some of it is within our domain, it's within our control, and a lot of it isn't. Quality, for example, third-party private sector providers, you don't know who the next Iteris is going to be, and when they are, you don't know if they're also going to include origin destination data or not, and you definitely don't know how much it's going to cost. So trying to get ahead of that, which is almost impossible, but knowing that what the gaps are helps us improve our intelligence about business intelligence. And so I'll just end my overview with a few sort of trending challenges that I think still remain. This list, I mean, this list could be like another 10 slides and in much smaller font. And I still wouldn't be able to tackle, I'm sure you all would still have like more to add to the issue of like biting off this big apple. But the first one is the one, after being a planner for 18 years now, this one it's never not been overwhelming, never. It's almost like the holy grail, and I don't think I will find it in my career or my lifetime. But anyways, you keep chasing and searching, and then, you know, we still have to get this cataloging done. I mean, there's all kinds of work. Caitlin in her presentation mentioned the metadata, big deal for cataloging, because that's how data stewards will end up speaking to each other relative to the data they have. Identifying champions or for specific roles within establishing data governance framework and carrying it out, that's very important. And then never mind all of the stuff that's on the horizon relative to CV data, as far as connected vehicle, autonomous vehicle, real-time, pseudo-real-time, post-time, aggregated, scaled up, scaled down, microscopic, etc. Like, that is just foreign territory. As much as we try to get a handle on it, that's going to be a moving target until it isn't. And then, we've got this whole new way of traveling that is upon us. And especially now after COVID, maybe that it gets accelerated, maybe it doesn't. But micromobility, dockless mobility, trip planning, real-time trip planning, real-time traveler info that's not specific to just roads is a big deal. But I'm very happy to sort of start taking a crack at this from a regional perspective. And so, I appreciate the workshops like this, because we can start to learn bits and pieces of what other examples and what state DOTs, MPOs, and local governments and transit operators could be doing, so that we can start to sort of piece by piece, brick by brick, build a better data house. But here's my contact info, and I'll be happy to answer any questions now or later, Anita. But thanks for listening, everybody. I enjoyed it.
Outstanding. Thank you, Kofi. I really love the regional approach of your presentation. Thank you for that. Okay, keep the questions coming. I'm going to introduce our last but certainly not least speaker, Johnny Wong with the Hillsborough MPO in Tampa, Florida. Johnny spent a decade in academia studying economic geography before finding a role in the planning industry. He currently manages the performance measures and data and analytics programs for his agency, and his team's latest accomplishment is the Clear Guide deployment, which I'm sure we're about to hear about. I'm turning it over to you, Johnny.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for the intro, Anita. I hope that you all can hear me pretty clearly. If not, feel free to yell at me in the question pod, and I'll try to adjust as best as I can. I'm really happy to be participating in another webinar about the status of our data business and governance plan. I think this is either the second or third time presenting, but regardless, this time around it's going to be really exciting because my agency's made a lot of progress since the last update. And so my presentation is going to take a little bit of a different perspective than some of the others. I hope to recap what our initial data business plan covered, and then kind of weave through stories about lessons learned and best practices. So before I get too deep into it, I want to provide a little bit of history. My agency participated in the data business pilot as the medium-sized MPO. Our planning area is home to about 1.5 million people, and the MPO serves the county government, the transit agency, and we have 3 city governments, including the city of Tampa. In my experience, and I've only been working for the MPO for about 4.5 years, but in the time that I've been there, I would say that the planning culture in Hillsborough is shifting rapidly toward being more supportive and more encouraging of innovation. And we really take a strong emphasis on pushing the envelope with emergent tools, and of course using data. And this is just one example of a trend, but back in 2018, the city of Tampa was directed by its mayor to treat the city like a lab. And what I took that to mean was that planners and agencies within the government should consider new ways of doing government. And that attitude has kind of caught on with other agencies across the region. And so needless to say, before that directive, the culture wasn't quite as strong in 2016 when we kicked off this pilot. So we've clearly made a lot of progress since then, and it's only been a few short years. But at the time, no one had done a full-scale programmatic analysis of our data practices. So our objective for the original plan were to identify specific individuals within agencies that maintain data sets, identify the data sets, how they're being collected or produced, and for what purpose. Also brainstorming if those data could be useful to other agencies, identifying opportunities for collaboration, and then setting goals for ourselves. I think you all should be pretty familiar with the format that my presentation is going to take, because Walter and just about everyone else summarized. So like I said, I'm going to go through the results and then try to weave through lessons on each slide. Our stakeholder group for the pilot was quite large because we extended invites outside of just the MPO's planning area to the wider region. We ended up bringing in folks from neighboring counties and cities, And ultimately, we interviewed participants from just about 24 agencies, and they spoke with us about data culture at each of their agencies. They helped us identify key individuals or stewards and walked us through the governance processes. It's not really a surprise, but the more established, structured, and well-funded agencies tend to have a more supportive culture toward data and analytical tools. The DOT is obviously a major user of mobility data, but within our region, there are some other agencies that are kind of hovering around the top, including the City of Tampa, which was a finalist or a final candidate for that big Smart Cities Challenge grant several years ago. Our transit agency is involved in a pilot program to run AV shuttles down a dedicated corridor, and our expressway authority is also managing a CD pilot, and they're one of only a few agencies to be involved in that. Our assessment during the pilot revealed that there were at least 50 unique mobility data sets, but we could be underestimating that. The reason for this is that we relied on our contacts to identify the data sets correctly, and as we know, due to the silo effect, there's not a good way of guaranteeing that the individuals we spoke with are even aware of all the data that's being collected and used within their own agency. I touched on this briefly during the previous slide, but the data landscape in our region is highly uneven. There are several agencies that have very limited resources to invest in computational tools and data sets, but at the same time, a few agencies have a very rich and well-structured data program. The data business plan concluded in 2016, and even back then, some of our agencies were acquiring data from CV deployments, so they're getting terabytes of data every few hours, right? All the agencies in the region were early members of the Waze Data Exchange, and some were even dabbling in predictive models back then. And this is kind of leading toward best practices. I just want to touch on it now, but I believe that as data-rich agencies continue to grow their expertise and grow their experience using analytical tools, it's going to be incumbent upon those agencies to proactively share data and insights with the others, because data inequity is a real problem and it doesn't get discussed very often. Despite the data wealth of some agencies, we discovered that there are still some important gaps in our program. Chief among these are limited collections of turn counts, limited bike ped data. OD is a source of information that just about every agency is always exploring, but none of us have purchased it yet because most of those data sets are a little too costly, especially for an MPO of our size. And finally, there are a few economic analytical tools available to us that can assess things like cost benefit, ROI, and others. We think that there are plenty of opportunities for intersectional analyses of data. So for example, a way to overcome the gap in data collection, we think, is to get agencies to agree to terms and purchase data sets together so that they can be used for multiple purposes. So we want to get away from agencies purchasing a data set that only meets a certain purpose. We want to invest in data sets that can be shared across agencies to help fulfill multiple missions. We have many forums for agencies to come together and discuss opportunities to collaborate. Before we even began the data business plan, the MPO already had an ITS committee that meets quarterly, and just about every participant to the data business plan pilot was represented on that committee. After the data business plan wrapped up, we created a regional big data working group specifically to discuss issues of data governance. That working group morphed into something better and more formal, which is called the Tampa Bay Smart Cities Alliance. That alliance has 4 action tracks, and one of the action tracks is managed by me and my team, and it's focusing on data and analytics. We also have a lot of intra-agency working groups focusing on data governance within each agency, and they send a rep to the ITS committee or to the Tampa Bay Smart Cities Alliance to report back on issues that they're having within their agency or department. As far as collaboration goes, and this is what I really want to focus on, we've had a major step forward in 2020 regarding collaboration because the MPO, alongside other agencies in Hillsborough County, have deployed a shared data and analytics platform finally. We've been talking about it since the data business plan pilot was happening, and only a few short years later, we finally got it operational. It's only been operational for about 7 or 8 months now, but we've already gotten a ton of value from it. Even over the past few months during a pandemic, when there hadn't been a ton of plans moving forward, we found uses for the data platform. And for the type of analyses that my agency is doing, it has saved us a ton of time and definitely made our planning processes more efficient and more effective. It's helping us place data in a central location, which encourages accessibility, and it's also helped us improve our analyses. I'll spare you some of the sales pitch language that's on this slide. It should suffice to say that we've gotten a ton of value from it in just a short period of time. The platform itself provides real-time contextual mobility intelligence. We use HERE data, which is provided to us for free by central office in a collaboration. That data set is real-time, and it can be binned in either 5, 15, or 60-minute intervals for more operational type processes, or daily, yearly, or even longer for planning purposes. We also have weather data, and we recently added Waze data, which is a crowdsourced data set. I imagine we're all familiar with that, and a crash data feed that is collected by our DOT district. I wish I had the time. I'm not going to do a live demo of it because we're limited to only 15 minutes, but this is the home screen with a map of Hillsborough County. From this view, the operations folks really like it because they're able to hover over any segment with the mouse, and it shows them really quickly current performance as well as historical average over the past 30 days. They can set up alerts so that if, let's say, speed or delay are deviating from the historical average, they get an email sent to them and they know to contact folks in the TMC and tell them to investigate. There's also metrics available like speed, delay, reliability. Since we've added that crash data feed, we're now able to hone in on hotspots for crash locations. We can filter those out by mode, severity, and we have incident data, which is provided to us by Waze users. Some of the use cases for this data platform are route planning. We're using the tool to study route performance. One of our first planning use cases is an exploratory study of performance along common commuter routes. We're calling the project the top 20 most miserable commutes. It has a nice kind of ring to it. We used our demand model to identify job clusters around the county, and these represent some of the highest volume destinations during the AM peak, and they represent some top origins during the PM peak. We drew routes connecting each job cluster to all other job clusters. We ended up with a matrix of 225 commuting routes. And then we plugged those routes into ClearGuide, and we calculated performance for each one of those routes and then ranked them according to how they performed, according to like 5 or 6 metrics. And this is just a thought exercise at this point. We haven't operationalized this into our prioritization process necessarily, but that blue line in the middle of the screen, which looks like a bunch of steps, represents a common commuter route. That route connects the Tampa International Airport to one of the historic neighborhoods in the urban core, and the commuter route performs poorly. The traditional way of dealing with congestion along those routes would be to target improvements along the main arterials. One is Hillsborough Ave, and I believe the other is Dale Mabry, which is shown highlighted in yellow. And the data and analytics platform is allowing us to ask better questions. So, for example, what if prioritizing improvements along the arterial is not the most impactful strategy for dealing with congestion? Because what if the majority of workers driving on those roads are not being connected from the airport to the neighborhood. Like I said, it's just a thought exercise for now, but having access to that portal is allowing us to ask questions like, what would happen if we do improvements on these roads along the corridors, the smaller corridors, rather than arterials? Would that be more impactful in reducing the problems that our county is facing? We're also using the data platform to improve planning processes by supplementing traditional LOS analysis with better metrics. Again, we have speed, delay, reliability available to us, as well as crashes. It's also been really helpful from a public engagement and transparency perspective. This table was turned around very quickly. In the past, it would have taken us several hours, if not days, to produce. This one, the content's not all that important, but this table is showing how our current travel time index scores compared to projections of future traffic conditions. Not only are we getting a lot of value, but our partners in the city are using this to retime some signals and evaluate the effectiveness of their signal retiming. You can see from this table that they provided that after timing signals in the downtown core, they've reduced travel time and delay just about everywhere. We're just getting started, right? Like, we wrapped up this data business plan pilot in 2016. 3 years later, we have a platform available. That platform has been kind of like a catalyst to have deeper conversations about what we want the future of planning and operations to look like in our region. And so I think that getting the data portal operational is really going to be remembered as a turning point for our area. Collaboration has increased. Innovation is rewarded and encouraged way more now than it was back in 2016. We're talking about building it out further and developing a future roadmap to include things like transit data, OD, micromobility, and then long-term turning it into a predictive model. As far as what we learned going through the process, our experience has been very positive. The data business plan served as a rough to-do list to improve governance, but we haven't always followed it exactly. We're moving in the right direction, but we're remaining flexible. We think it's much better to be flexible than to be rigid and dogmatic, particularly because these efforts require consensus, and it's not always easy to achieve consensus if you're not being flexible. We also think that good governance and particularly governance related to data must be intersectional. Value should be demonstrated for agencies doing planning as well as management and operations and public engagement. The value needs to be there, and it needs to be clear for agencies with vastly different missions. Those are some lessons that we learned. If I were to suggest best practices to others, I would suggest preparing yourself to make the case for investing in computational tools and creating a data governance plan. None of this is cheap. Agencies with resources obviously have access to better tools. So it makes sense from a planning perspective to make the argument first to yourself that it's critical to invest in these things, so that if you're asked by a member of your board or a member of the public, you can quickly rattle off 3, 4, or 5 reasons why it's useful to invest in these kind of things. And I guess last, it's really important to continue updating the data business plan. We had to completely rethink our governance practices once we got the tool operational, and obviously it shouldn't be treated as a static document, but we're considering doing another large update in the near future. And I'm over my time, so I apologize, but that's all I have. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Johnny. That was outstanding. You did a great job showing what you can do when you do get all that data together and you've achieved your regional cooperation, coordination, and data business planning at the regional level. So thank you for that. Perfect. We're going to go to the Q&A screen here, and I recall that you can download the presentations directly from this pane right here, or you can also go back to the NOCOE website and download the presentations there as well. I'd like to encourage, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and post them here in the last couple of minutes. And I also want to remind everybody listening that Each of these stories is unique, and we anticipate and expect that all of you listening have your own unique stories or starting places as to where you are with respect to data business planning and data coordination in your region. And we'd like to encourage you to contact Walter or myself if you're interested in a tailored workshop that we can come in. And currently we're not doing them live, but you never know. Hopefully in the future we can be doing that again, but where we can do a personalized workshop for you with some lessons learned, some training, and work with you and your stakeholders to start looking at data governance or pick it up wherever you are along your maturity level. So at this point, I'm going to, if I don't have any further questions, David has a good summary here. Thank you all for some excellent information. I'm going to turn it over to Walter to say a couple minutes at the very end, and then we'll be ready to wrap it up. So, Walter.
Thank you, Anita. On behalf of Federal Highway Administration, I'd like to thank, first of all, our 8 presenters who have offered varying flavors of their data business plan. So the audience, I hope it was time well spent hearing about FHWA's effort in facilitating the development of regional mobility data business plans. Thank you for joining us today. One thing I would like to mention is that as part of this program, FHWA developed a one-pager to assist technical staff better articulate the benefits of developing and implementing a data business plan. And we could be able to make that document available to you. I would work with the Center of Excellence and see if we could be able to have it uploaded, or you could contact Anita and myself, and we would have that document. So please do not hesitate, as Anita mentioned, to contact us regarding the one paper or future assistance. And finally, to the National Operations Center of Excellence, Nilo and team, I'd like to thank you for hosting us, and hope you've all had a wonderful time, listening, into this national webinar. Thank you. Back to you, Anita.
Excellent. Thank you all. Good afternoon, and we look forward to hearing from many